was so much blood everywhere. Several times they had to take actual bodies out of the parties, and they would always joke around, oh, we had to throw it in a dumpster. And then when I sent a message to Juliet, who's an Epstein survivor, she says that is very strange because in New Mexico or something like that, she thought that there was something going on. So she says that's very creepy when it comes to the mummies.
Mm-hmm.
So, other than that, okay.
Did she tell you what she thought was going on?
No, we were direct messaging each other on Twitter.
Well, let me ask you, when you noticed that the mummies smelled, did you notice, how often do you recall?
I remember, the mummies smelling when it would start getting warm out, or when they had the doors open, or just they would start smelling, and then the mummies would disappear. And they said that the mummies were being taken to a museum to be on display.
So then,
and what's really strange too, this is what's really strange, okay? The entire place, the apartment, and even Alan's house in the suburbs and a couple of other apartments in the city that he had, there were cameras everywhere. And they said the same thing that later on, this is how I knew what Maria was telling me was just so factual, because Leslie and Alan, I had started questioning a lot, and I had asked them why there were so many cameras. And they said that the insurance companies would not insure the artwork unless there were cameras throughout the apartments and the homes. And that's why there were cameras everywhere. But Alan would, in one of the closets, you had all the recording equipment from the cameras. He would take the tapes and send them somewhere. And I have no idea where they were sent. But he would send the tapes somewhere.
Do you have any sense of how often he would send the tapes?
No, I didn't even pay any attention to it. I just knew that he would package them up, and he would have to take the tapes. He would take them to his store, which was Kramer Furs, and they would ship the tapes out from the shipping department at the store.
And the store was called Kramer Furs?
Kramer Furs. K-R-A-M-M-E-R, and then Furs, F-U-R-S. And then, Kramer Furs, yeah, so that's what he would do with the tapes as far as having them shipped. Wherever he shipped them, I have no idea.
So the tapes to Kramer Furs, tapes were shipped from Kramer Furs to locations you weren't aware of.
I was not aware of, but there was something else really strange too, and I don't want to go too off into another area, but, Alan, because I became part of their little circle. And Alan would, in the middle of the night, he would get up and have to go. He would get phone calls, and I would stay at Alan's house a lot, sleep overnight. And he would get calls in the middle of the night, and he would have to go and meet with individuals at a synagogue on Lakeshore Drive. And he would always say that he has to meet with Israeli officials. So in the middle of the night, he would go to a synagogue and meet with people. And he would, at times I had to sit in the car and wait while he was having meetings. And at one point it was so cold out, and I was sitting in his car, and I was so cold, and he wouldn't let me come in. I actually just got out of the car and actually started knocking at the door, and they did let me sit in the lobby. And so there was so much going on, and it was so strange because as soon as I came in contact with the entire crew, and they were very proud to refer to themselves as the Jew crew. They had no issues with that, and that's what they would call themselves. So when I came in contact with the crew, you would not believe how much they did in one day. It was like they went to bed at around 1 a.m. and they were up and out by 6 a.m. I mean, as far as there was no sleep at all, and how they were able to do so much. I know that they were using drugs, like mainly Librium, which is not an upper. But Alan used to use speed. I never actually saw Leslie use speed, but I did witness Leslie use Librium. And what Alan would do, and Leslie would joke around about it too, Alan would put speed in the coffee of his salespeople at the store, and he would joke around about it because he would say that they would be able to sell more if they were high off of speed.
Were they ever aware?
Be able to sell more clothes.
Were they aware of the methamphetamine in there?
No. And they would joke around about drugging the goyim. They would always refer to non-Jewish people as goyim. And they would always talk about how stupid my parents were. And before I met them, I was close to my mom and dad. I didn't have any problems with my mother and father. But they would convince me that my mom and dad were stupid goyim. And they were constantly repeating that. So my relationship with my mom and dad at the time changed. And then they would make us watch tapes, old Holocaust black and white movies. And later on they were color movies. And they would make us watch these movies, and then they would talk about the goyim and what the goyim did to the Jews. And it was just, there was so much going on. And then on Sunday morning, they would actually dance around the apartment whenever Leslie would stay at Alan's house. And Leslie had apartments in Chicago, but at times he would even stay at a hotel. And Alan and Leslie would dance around the apartment watching Baptist, like Black Baptist church show Sunday morning. And then they would joke around and Leslie would go, there's a Leslie Wexner dress. There's an Alan Kramer fur coat. And they would dance around the house watching Black Baptist church shows with people jumping up and down and clapping. And they would make fun of them. And that's what they looked forward as far as doing Sunday morning, which was odd.
Yeah. With the films, the Holocaust films, how many boys would watch a film at a time, and how many boys would you say were generally there that you recall at any moment?
At any moment, there were like no more than approximately 5 at a moment. And they would try to keep us separated, and they always wanted to keep competition between us. I mean, like, for instance, when they had a party, there were a lot of boys. And we're talking like a lot. We're talking like 15 to 20, maybe even more at times. Now, the parties, the Mafia parties, there were a lot of boys. But when it came to just us watching the Holocaust films, at the most, I remember maybe 5. And we would sit around, they had a sofa that was built in, and we would sit there and they would make us watch these movies. And then they would talk about everything that the Goyim did to the Jews and how horrible Goyim is.
With the other boys there, do you remember anything of their backgrounds? Were they...
Okay, I was always looked upon like I was put on a pedestal. A lot of them were very poor, and they were not from wealthy families. Most of them were runaways that were actually like staying at friends' homes that Alan set up as far as them meeting their friends, and they would stay at their homes. And for some reason, I don't know why, you had so many of them coming from like Iowa and Nebraska, and they would actually have Lance go to Iowa and pick up boys and bring them back. Lance was Lillian H. Florsheim's hairdresser, and he was originally from Iowa, and he would actually go to Iowa and meet boys and bring them back. Now, how he met them in Iowa, I don't know, but he would bring them in from Iowa. They had them living in apartments everywhere with older men, or even in the beginning, they had them staying in hotel rooms at the Abbott Hotel in Chicago on Belmont, or they would have them at the YMCA on Chicago Avenue.
No. No, go ahead.
Yes. At a couple of times, I would actually go and sleep at the YMCA on Chicago Avenue. Okay? And it was crazy because they had a theater called the Bijou Theater, and they created not adult films, but they created like films with young boys, underage boys. Mm-hmm. So they had these films that they created at the Bijou Theater, which they did photograph me there. And the FBI has those photographs when they raided my apartment in New York, because I had the photos in an accordion file. I had a few of the pictures because they had given me photos, and I had kept them for years. Mm-hmm. And I was nude. I was very young at the time. And they would send boys to the Bijou Theater to be photographed. And then later on, they made it very clear that they would send the videos to different adult sex shops throughout the United States. And they were filmed in Chicago. And see, that's what a lot of people don't know either. That Chicago was like a main hub at one point for the gay community in the 70s and early 80s. Mm-hmm. And it was a very leather scene. There were leather shops, S&M shops. And what's strange, though, is the amount of young kids that were runaways back then. And they were like for instance, if they were gay, they were coming from all over the Midwest, and they were coming to Chicago.
With the boys,
it was like a hub.
Yep. With the boys that you would, no more than 5 at a time. What sort of length? Watching the movies. And during what length of time did you, what was your recollection with those boys? During how many months would you see them? Were there times when you wouldn't see them? There would be more boys brought in. What was your sense of this sort of turnover?
That's what everyone was scared of too, because everyone was scared that they would be pushed out of the group. And they played so many mind games with us as far as comparing us to different boys. And everyone, it seemed like all the runaway boys were always looking for an older guy to take care of them. Mm-hmm. So the boys, for some reason, they were not there. That the was in 89. Yes, in 89. And the raid was in Philadelphia, was the first raid. And I had a lot of photographs and a lot of information. And they even took pictures off of the walls mm-hmm. of different people. And what was crazy, though, then, my experiences with Leslie, the first experience I had with him sexually was in the apartment, in Alan's apartment. And then at one point, Leslie was flying in from Ohio, and a lot of times they would fly into a private airport called Neggs Field. And Leslie at that time was staying at the Hilton Hotel. And I remember I went to the Hilton Hotel on Michigan Avenue, and I walked in. It was a beautiful room. It was almost like a mini suite, and there were French doors going into one of the bedrooms. And eventually, Leslie and I were in bed together, and he was gross. And he started sitting on me. First he started sitting on my chest and went down and wanted me to perform oral sex on him, and I just wouldn't do it. That's when he was trying to get almost sitting on my chest. But then he went and sat on and in no time at all, he is all over me. It was so disgusting that I jumped up and I was gagging and I had to go into the shower, and I took a shower and I wanted to leave at that point. And he blocked me from leaving, and he said to me that I was not going, and he would not let me leave. He says everything was fine, and he calmed me down. But this is what was so strange. He had sheets in the room, and he changed the sheets. So I thought later on, why did he have those sheets in that room? He was planning on doing that to me. Because why would he have a set of sheets in the room?
Some of the documents that you'd sent me, I recall looking at, you were some mention of a residence where there was a dungeon built into the basement, and there was a series of bathtubs in the basement, and that you recalled seeing mostly Catholic boys that were placed in the bathtubs and urinated on. Tell me a bit more about that.
Okay, I'm going to tell you about that too, and I want to mention, and this is one of the reasons why, I mean, I am just like, as far as the FBI and the Department of Justice, okay, they're so corrupt, it's unbelievable, because I reported everything to the prosecutors at the Department of Justice. I reported everything to attorneys in Philadelphia. I reported everything to the FBI, and I reported everything to a postal inspector in Philadelphia. And this was the late 1980s. And they told me that, oh, you're delusional. Oh, you're crazy. Oh, you're insane. Oh, you're anti-Semitic, because I had just repeated some of the things that all of these Jewish men were saying to us about Goyim and everything, and then I would repeat comments that they would make to each other. They would call each other, they would say, oh, they only called each other, but they would not allow anyone else to call them that. But they would call each other that. And I repeated that to the federal authorities and the FBI agent. And they started saying that I was an anti-Semite. And I'm like, no, I'm just repeating what was going on. And I repeated the Mafia parties to that. And the Mafia parties, they told me that I was delusional and they did not exist. There was no such thing. And the Mafia party was a party that they would, like, it was like an event that they would set up. You had the Mafia party for guys that were into young boys. And when I say young boys, okay, once you turn 15, you were too old. So they wanted them between 12 and 14. So they had Mafia parties that they would give on like a long weekend, and people would fly in from all over the United States and Canada and sometimes Europe. So they would have the parties in basements of either homes in Chicago, or they would have parties in mansions in the suburbs. And we're talking about estates. So the parties, I'll never forget it. At one point, there was always a sign. They would cut their nails very short. And eventually they said that they had to cut the nails short because the nails, if they were longer, it would tear the rectum of the young boys because their skin was very sensitive and they didn't want too much blood all over the place. Yeah. So whenever they would cut their nails short, I kind of knew what was going on. And one evening, we got into Alan's Corvette, and it was only a two-seater, and it was Leslie, Alan, and myself. And I just sit on Leslie's lap. So we drove to, this party was at Phil Pecklow's home. And we went into the home, and as I went downstairs, there was just unbelievable. They had slings hanging from the ceiling. And they had flower pot holders with Crisco oil hanging from the flower pot holders. And then they had, we're talking rows of bathtubs with young boys were in the bathtub, and it's very, very dark. And they would urinate and actually, like, the boys. The smell was unbelievable, but they did have fans. Okay? And then they would actually have boys in slings, which I was in a sling in the past, and a couple of times. I didn't want to, I know that I did a few podcasts in the past, and they didn't want me to go into graphic details because of the fact they were afraid that their podcast would be taken down. But with this interview, I believe that I can go into details. But they would actually put their fingers in the Crisco oil and then shove their fingers in the boy's butt. And they did it to me too, which I don't like to talk about. And it was very painful, but they were always giving everyone Quaaludes and Librium. And I didn't know this, but it was one reporter that told me that was to relax us. And then Ryan Dawson, who's a podcaster, just recently sent me a message telling me that they gave you that to relax your muscle. So they would actually stick their fingers in your rectum, and then they would try to pull it out, and they would walk around with Polaroid cameras and take pictures of actually, they called it a rose. They would take pictures of it, and then there were binders of roses, and then they would show each other, and they were actually getting off on looking at the roses of underage boys.
The boys that you remember at the party, do you remember what the average age?
Sent to other people. At 15, they introduced, and I was 14 when they started introducing me to John DuPont. And what was strange, though, at the parties, there was so much blood everywhere that they had one person that would walk around cleaning up the blood that was on the floor if there was too much. And then several times they had to take actual bodies out of the parties, and they would always joke around, we had to throw it in a dumpster. But I don't know if that's true. I don't know what they did with the body.